Welcome to Transactional Love Stories. I am your host, Becky Burdick, and I'm going solo again this week while Crystal is getting settled into her new digs. This week I wanted to talk about what makes us choose the people that we love, and it's going to be kind of a layered conversation, I think. There's so much that goes into why we pick out the people that we pick. I think some of it, for me, what I call our core love that's established by your parents, your mother and your father, when you're from infant on up, growing up as a child. And that's the kind of love that makes us feel comfort, protected. It's the deepest kind of trust that you can have. So when we grow up in a relationship with our parents that is missing those items, it's very damaging to who we are as people. The downside to that is then look for love in all the wrong places, right? We instead of looking for somebody that's necessarily good for us, we tend to take the first person of generally the sex of the parent that is the one that has neglected us. So, for example, my situation. Mine was my dad. So then when a male gives me attention, it's easy then to misinterpret any type of attention as a sign of love. So if you don't get that like you need to when you're growing up, you're not going to be able to understand what's good love and what's bad love when it's facing you. So that's why so many of us, it's so easy to get into a bad relationship because growing up, that was the norm to us. And I try to get people to understand, even though it's our norm, we know it's not right or it's not okay or it's abusive, but it's still our normal. It's hard then to jump out of that and try to picture love in any other way because that it just doesn't make sense to us. I've had people ask me, what's it like not to love your dad? And I said, well, it doesn't make sense to me when you say you do love your dad because I can't fathom that. If there's no way your dad can be that nice that you could just love them. I just assume that even though not all dads are abusive like mine was, I assume that all dads got to have something not right about them that makes them kind of fall into my level of, I don't know, how can you love that? But yet also then I can picture like falling in love, like I fell in love with my husband. He's a dad. How does that make sense? And how do I get that to make sense to other people who don't understand that concept? And I know those of you who are in my situation, it probably does kind of make sense to you, even though I'm not even saying things that actually work together. But I get that. Why do we do that? And I think that's the biggest reason right there is we don't have that guide to teach us the right from wrong. It's not like my dad ever sat me down and said, a man should treat you like this. My mom said, she's the one who would teach me and say to me, don't ever accept anyone treating you in a way that you do not want to be treated. You deserve better, so don't put up with that kind of shit. I did. I took that to heart. And so the only problem is, sometimes I wonder, do I expect too much then from a male spouse? Like, am I expecting them to be perfect and to treat me perfect? And if they're not that, it's almost like I'm trying to figure out what my expectations should be versus the reality versus is the person that I'm with, and I'm not talking about my husband, but this is for everyone, is the person that I'm with toxic? How do people in our situation figure that out when we didn't have that guide? So it can be very difficult to sit there and rationalize that because, when you're talking to your friends, you can go talk to your girlfriends, right? But they're probably going to listen to you talk about your side, and it is going to be one-sided. They're going to hear your side. They're not going to hear his side. We do know without, even taking digs that men and women do just think differently. And so that doesn't help the situation as well either. So it's, where do we get that guidance from? It's a good question. And it's something that I'd love to hear from other people. But it's something that I want to be treated how I expect to be treated and how I look at, because when I think about being in a relationship, I think about, okay, take any topic, any subject. My first thought is, well, how do I want to be treated regarding this? What's fair? What do I want? And what I want is what I also try to give back. And I try to make it known and I try to keep the conversation open. I'm thinking, like whatever topic, I'll state, I'm thinking this on this because this is what I would like and expect back. I try to be open, and I think that's like huge in trying to work on any relationship is here's why I do what I do. Here's my expectation of what I expect. And I would think my mind tells me that anyone or my spouse or whomever loves me back, they're going to match that expectation or do their best to do that. Because that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying my best to match your expectation. And that's also, I'm like, I will ask that. What do you expect? What do you want out of whatever that situation is? Having those conversations, I think, are huge, but you also have to back it up. I think the big struggle is, with somebody like me in my situation, I'm not just going to take words at face value. I'm very much a person where show me, don't just tell me. I want to hear it, but don't just say you love me. Show me you love me in your actions. And if your actions don't match, well, then it's a real struggle, and I'm going to always be skeptical of that. The other thing, too, is, when you've been in a situation that's been abusive, especially from your parents, trust is very difficult. And anytime you come into a brand new relationship, you're having all those conversations, right? And you're going to say all the right things to each other, and you're going to hear all the right things from the other person. That I think is part of the problem is we put up this front because we want to try to be chosen, right, by the other person. So we state all these things. I expect this out of a mate, and that person says all those right things. So we fall head over heels. And then we start to relax in those relationships and all that stuff falls apart. I know that's one of the biggest problems in relationships. How many people say, oh, if we could only go back to the time when we were actually in love. But everybody gets so comfortable that they just stop trying in a lot of relationships. Or that's the good things that were talked about at the beginning weren't really true to begin with. So those are some of the things, too, that don't help, obviously. So that's one of the things, if you're going to go into a relationship, just be honest about who you are, what your expectations are. There's no room then for disappointment if you're just truthful. And then if you state who your expectations are, you have to keep up with those. I think one of the problems, again, by coming from an abusive situation is you're not taught that stuff. You're taught to look for the words, not necessarily the actions, because you probably didn't hear the words. If you were in an abusive relationship, you didn't probably hear I love you too often, or you knew if it was said at that point it was fake. But, I can remember one time for sure that my dad said I love you. I'm going to give a second time, but I don't know if he actually said it that second time. We're talking 50 years here of time. The second time I'll just give him because I don't actually recall if he actually said it or not. Don't really know, just going to give it. Then when somebody says it, that's where we can get caught up and where we can get in trouble because now we're looking just for the words and we're not necessarily paying attention to the actions going with the words. Again, the downside, the scary side is in so many people who get into an abusive adult relationship with a spouse, it usually almost always started off real sweet, real nice, and as soon as they get married, the gloves came off. And then we try to give them the buys, right? We give them those excuses. Oh, but they were so sweet. And remember that one day when we had this really nice day and that time, they did this for us and when they took us here. And we give them all those things so we can, for the first few times we're making excuses. Well, it's okay. Maybe they're upset. Maybe they're bothered by work, or maybe they had a rough day. My mom would always say, my dad doesn't feel good. There was always an excuse to go with why he was acting like an ass. The truth is, there isn't an excuse as to why they should be acting like asses. It doesn't need to be there. I make a conscious effort. If I'm having a bad day at work, I don't bring that home and start screaming at my husband. Or I don't go to work when I'm mad at my husband and start yelling at my coworkers. I don't do it because I'm paying attention to where I'm at, and I still might be grumpy, and maybe I'll just say, hey, I need a few minutes to cool down, had a bad day. And then, it's a perfect opportunity for a loving spouse to say, well, can I listen? Do you want to talk about it, or be supportive in whatever way? Those are things that, we give those excuses to them, and then we give the next excuse, and then we give the next excuse, and to try and it's not like I'm saying you can never ever be forgiving, right? But there's a line when it's too far and too much. Finding that line when you come from an abusive situation is hard to find, because we've been, my mom would give excuses, and okay, so we're going to go with this today, and you just learn to put up with. You figure that that's just part of being in a relationship, being in a family. There's so much that you just think this is just as good as it gets. That's the tough part. It really is the tough part. And even getting into, why don't you just leave that person? Because your friends are going to probably say that to you at some point. Why are you still there? Easier said than done, because I wasn't a good judge on this relationship. How the heck am I going to judge the next one? You go back and you second guess everything. You wonder, I fell victim to this. Am I not smart enough to figure this out? And then there's the whole scary aspect of leaving, and that can be just a whole different podcast, because that also has a lot of different layers as to why it's not just easy to pick up and leave. But those core things that you miss out, and even if you get that from one parent, like I did, I got that from my mom, but it still feels like a hole that you're missing. And it feels like there's a whole half of you that just isn't there. We're trying to fill that hole. We look for it in the wrong places, probably. The other thing that makes me sit and wonder, and I'm not trying to diss one sex or the other, male or female. What's sad to me is when you talk to people, the more people you talk to, or even just the fact that there's just so many of us who have been in these abusive relationships, that there's so many people who are so willing to hurt other people without a care in the world and think nothing of it. Not only do you hurt the person the first time, but you continue to hurt them by gaslighting them and spinning the story to make them think that you're doing what you're doing to them and it's their fault because you had to do it. Why? It's almost like, from my point of view, thinking about a man who might love me and take care of me the way I deserve to be taken care of would be like finding a unicorn. And I'm sure the same men who've been in those situations can say the same thing about women. Why is it easier to find somebody who treats us terribly than it is to find somebody who treats us well? And I know those of you that are sitting there going, well, I'm not a bad person. That's awesome, and I'm glad that you're not. But it's just, there's so many people that are in this situation, and it's baffling to me that people can treat other people poorly and be okay that they're doing that. This is a concept I don't understand. And like I said, I'm somebody that I hope that I never do that, because I'm always trying to think about the other person's feelings. If I say this, what does that do to that person? If I do that, what will that do to that person? And if I think I may have accidentally said or done something wrong, and sometimes you do, there's times where I'm thinking this and I say this, and that's not how I meant at all for that to come out. And I'm like, well, I will, whoa. That is not what I was thinking or trying to say. I think when your intent is always to try to be a good person, even if you say something wrong and you come back, hey, hold on, that came out of my mouth completely wrong. I get people that are like, no, we know you didn't mean that because you are not that person. But I'm always trying to not be that person. I'm always trying to be somebody that is conscious and caring and thinking about others. So I don't understand the people that don't stop and think about that. And that's, again, I'd love to hear both sides, although I can't imagine somebody who would say, I don't really care, actually speak up and say that. I'm sure they won't. I don't know, just thoughts on that. If you want to share that with us, I'd love to hear that. Because it's just something, when I don't understand something, now I want to learn about it. And learning about how people think is really fascinating to me. Even if it's something I don't necessarily agree with, I want to hear how you think and why you think it. That's just a touch of why we fall in love with the wrong people. I really believe that if we were to have that core from our parents right away, I really believe we'd be able to make better choices in our relationships as we grow. And I think it's hard, and I think that's why we don't trust. And maybe that's also part of the problem. When we do find somebody that could be good for us, we don't trust that because that's too good to be true. Why would somebody want to treat us like this, and what's wrong with that person that they're willing to do that? Because, we've been told, and we're convinced we don't deserve it, that everything that's ever happened to us that's bad has been our fault. So then it kind of just stands to reason why we don't trust somebody that might come along that is. And especially if they move at a rate of speed that doesn't make sense to us. If somebody comes, I don't want to say at me too fast, but if that's the way it's understood, if somebody comes at me too fast, I'm like, whoa, back down. That seems sketchy. That doesn't seem right. There's no way that you can feel that much for me that fast. And then you become skeptical. And I don't know about other people, but it's hard for me to switch gears once that doubt starts to come in. Like, it's going to take you a while to prove what you say. I think the other flaw that I can see, like I know I have, is I do take things very literally. I do take things to heart really fast. And so if you say it, you better show up. I am, for those people that like to say things and, but it doesn't really matter. It's not that big a deal. If I don't show up, somebody like me is going to take that very negatively and think very, even people who are late. And, some things I've learned to be able to let go over the years. But, like, if you say you're going to be there and do something, I'm going to be pretty torqued if you're not there, unless you got a really good reason to not have come, especially if I need to rely on you for something. And that's something, I do a lot of volunteer work. So if I run an event and I'm counting on you to be there to help run this event, and as a fundraiser, I need you there, and you don't show up because you're like, well, I want to do this instead. That's not something that's going to sit with me very well. Part of my struggle is that just because, I am a control person? Is it because I do take things very literally because of my past? That's what I'm curious about. Where does that piece come from? The other downside is because I've had to, people will say we're empaths. No, I just pay attention to every single little detail. Like a change in somebody's breathing pattern can tell me all kinds of things, right? A slight movement, a slight look to a different direction. I'm reading everything in the room. When something very slight, like I'm already skewing off, okay, what does that mean? I'm looking for that meaning behind that glance, that blink, that breath, whatever. Because for me growing up, that was survival. Now, when I do that as an adult, I don't necessarily need it so much for survival. I mean, you do, right? You got to learn how to read a room. You got to learn how to pay attention to people's cues. Like if people are trying to walk away from you and you're not picking up on that, you've all been in those situations where you're like, okay, I'm trying to get away. Why aren't you figuring this out? I'm very conscious of I want to read those cues. The downside is when you read every minute cue and you're making judgments off something that you don't need to be making a judgment off of. The person just blinked. The person just glanced a different direction. That doesn't necessarily mean it's got to go down this rabbit hole. That makes relationships harder, I think, for people like us, because we're reading into everything. We're not paying attention to the whole picture all the time, because And this is, a lot of it's just not even something that we consciously do. It's in our subconscious level because it was, like I said, was survival for us. Those are the concepts that to get other people to understand, that's just in my brain all the time. And why my brain is just going, a million miles an hour is because of all these little things that other people can relax and not have to sit and think about. Those of us who've been in those situations, that's just a small part of what our brains are thinking. Now add in all the other things like, did I remember the kids' lunch money? Did I remember to pay this bill? Did I remember to finish this report? I mean, you name it, it's there. It's just a constant. It makes you wonder, as I'm sitting here saying all this, like, you got to wonder, like, what could I have accomplished if I wasn't so busy thinking about all this ridiculous little crap that just doesn't even matter? So I'm hoping this helps a little bit to understand how easy it is and why we do. It's easy to sit back and be an armchair quarterback. It's easy to sit back and watch. I'm the same way. I can sit back and be like, you should have seen that one coming, or you should know better. But looking at my own situation in my mind, even though I think I'm knowing better, I've still made some bad choices throughout my years. How do you get past that? I've talked about emotional intelligence, either in my podcasts and in my blogs and stuff, but that really makes a huge difference. And I think still having that open conversation, if you can find somebody that you do trust, if you do have a parent that has been good to you and treats you well, or a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, or a friend, or journal it down and find those things to help you move forward instead of staying stuck where you are. And even if you've accomplished getting past a stuck point, keep working, because no matter how good you are, no matter how much you've put effort into your well-being, you can only benefit by continuing to expand. There is no end to working on yourself. And even if you have these issues, that doesn't mean you're broken and you're non-functioning and you should just steer clear of relationships. I hear somebody, I'm just not meant to be in a relationship. That's got nothing to do with it. What you need to do is find somebody who's willing to work with you in your relationship and in your growth, but you also have to grow with them as well. You can't just sit back and say, well, that's who I am and tough crap, because that's not growing. That's accepting where you are and just wanting to stay put. You and no one around you is going to be happy with that. You are going to go through relationships. You are going to lose people if that's your stance. Change your stance and try to figure out how to get past your stuck points. And in doing that, people will want to come to you. They will want to help you, and you will attract some good people. And when you are working on yourself and you will build confidence in yourself, you will be able to look for the good people. And when you have the bad people around, you'll have the confidence enough to say, I deserve better. And you need to say that to yourself every single day. I deserve better. And it might just be better than the way I thought yesterday, by improving myself, by working on myself every day. Journaling's going to do that. It's going to help you, but that's not your only resource. Journal. Find somebody you trust. Find a therapist that works for you. Not every therapist is going to be what you need. If you don't come out of there feeling fabulous, go find another one. Don't feel like you're stuck with that one. And I don't care if they're a family friend or whoever they are. If it's not working for you, go find somebody that does. So I hope this helps. I'm going to keep this short again today because I know we're all super busy. I'd love to hear your feedback. Please let us know what you think of this. If you have questions, comments, if there's topics you'd like to hear about or discuss, we can keep it anonymous. I can bring you on so you can ask those questions. We can do live chats too. I think that would be fun and change things up. Feel free to reach out. So once again, thank you for joining me today on Transactional Love Stories.